So here's the breakdown of pros and cons for 3 different methods of selling your property. So the first method is for sale by owner. Some of the pros there are cost savings. Obviously, you don't necessarily have to work with an agent. You're pretty much eliminating that 6% fee that the buyer and the seller side agents will charge you. You absolutely have a little bit more control over the process. You can allow showings when you want to. You're the one that everybody's going to go to when it comes to purchasing this property. Another one of the pros is it gives you motivation to maximize profit. Obviously, without the fees of the agent, with you having full control over the situation, if you know what you're doing, it could be a good way to sell the property and make a little bit more money than you would have selling with an agent, for example. Some of the cons are marketing limitations. Not a whole lot of people that execute for sale by owners are able to market the property the way an agent is able to market a property. Oftentimes somebody thinks, hey, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna do a for sale by owner, and they may not understand all the paperwork that is required to sell your property. Another big thing when going the for sale by owner route that people don't really think about is how much time is this actually gonna take me? If you price your property competitively, you can have anywhere from 20 to 30 showings in the course of just a weekend. And sometimes people don't really anticipate how engaged they're gonna have to be in the process in order to get their property sold. Another big con that I see is folks will overestimate or severely underestimate the value of their property. We've come across a ton of for sale by owner sellers that have tried to run that process. They've come to us and they've expressed that, hey, this property, I've had it listed for sale by owner for 120 days. We'll pull up the property and you're $100,000 over like comps in the area. So obviously market expertise is really important when it comes to selling your property. Understanding what seasonality of the market, what sort of market cycle we're in is going to be extremely important with all of that. Folks will underestimate the value of their property significantly, or they'll use something like Zillow or Realtor.com, which those are AVM models. Those aren't always accurate. And also appraisals, they get the property appraised. There's a huge difference between an appraisal and what your property is going to sell for on the open market. So we've actually come across people where they've underestimated the value of their property by 20, 30, 40, 50 grand. And they got a lot of traction. They accepted an offer and they're like, hey, Bobby, we don't really need your services anymore. We got it sold. And then I'll take a look at what they had it listed for. And they could have gotten $50,000 more for the property. So those are a couple pros and cons to selling your property for sale by owner. The next strategy that I want to talk about is selling your property with an agent. So selling your property with an agent, there's some obvious pros. Depending on which agent you choose, which is extremely important, the agent is going to have some market expertise if you choose the right one. You're gonna have a lot more exposure with that property. If you go with somebody at Keller Williams, they're gonna have the ability to blast that property out everywhere, connect with other agents that might have clients that are looking for similar properties. The marketing ability of an agent is definitely a pro. And then also at the end of the day, they're gonna handle all of the paperwork and the negotiations. So it's something that you won't have to deal with. So if you've never done it before and you're unfamiliar with the legalities and the forms and the different pieces of paper that you have to sign when transacting real estate, an agent is there to make sure that you're protected and that all of that paperwork is handled properly. Some obvious cons when listing with a real estate agent is, hey, you have to pay commissions, right? I know there's been some changes to rules and regulations with realtors, but generally speaking, the way it's been in the past, an agent's gonna charge you 6%, right? There's gonna be 3% on the buy side, 3% on the sell side. Sometimes those numbers don't match out to be 3 and 3, but you get the point. You automatically have to account for 6% going to the agents that are helping you out with the transaction. Some of the cons as well is you have less control over the process. You always have the ability to request and tell the agent where you want to list the property at, because ultimately the agent is working for you. But agents are trained to be very persuasive to sell the property where they think it's going to sell at the quickest speed possible, right? So an agent is looking at you as a transaction. They're looking at you as a commission check, and their ultimate goal is to price the property at a price point that is going to get them the most amount of money in the quickest amount of time, right? So that's one of the obvious cons to working with a real estate agent. And then I know I've mentioned this before, but the agent skill level is something that, generally speaking, working with real estate agents is a con. Redfin says that, hey, right now there's 1.5 million houses on the market, and then there's 3 million people in the United States that currently hold a real estate license. So that tells you that there's a lot of people that are just, a lot of agents that are just sitting on the sideline right now. You may be talking to an agent that is backed by a credible firm, but may have only sold 1 or 2 houses a year for the last couple of years. So sometimes the credibility of the agent and that true expertise can be a little iffy, so that's what puts it in the con bucket. The last option that you have when selling your property is to sell to a trustworthy home buyer. So I'm going to break down a couple of the pros and cons of, what that looks like. So one of the obvious pros is quick sale, right? So if you're in a position where you need cash, a lot of those other options that we talked about don't really allow you to get that cash or that transaction completed in a timely manner. But when you're working with a home buyer, there's some home buyers, we've closed on plenty of houses in 5 days or less. So if you're in a position where you need cash quick, those other 2 options aren't really going to provide you with that. And that's what puts the quick sell in the pro bucket when you're dealing with a trusted home buyer. The second thing is cash offers, right? So when you're dealing with a credible home buyer, you're cutting out the middleman. You're dealing directly with the source, the person that has the money that is going to pay you. So it doesn't matter what somebody's opinion on the evaluation of the property is. All that matters is that home buyer is going to say, hey, I'm going to give you X amount of dollars in exchange for your property. So you're cutting out the middleman, and you have a lot more certainty when you're working with a home buyer because they are the ones that are buying the property. The next pro is it's a true as-is sale. So a lot of people use as-is as a buzzword, and if you're listing your property on the market with an agent and you tell them that you want to sell the property as is, it's not really as is, right? There are some requirements that buyers, when you go to the open market, there's some requirements that the buyer's lender will have that inherently make it almost impossible for it to be an as-is sale. When you're working with a home buyer, the home buyer is buying the house. There's no other party involved. It is usually very clear cut that, hey, my offer has no contingencies. Now, it's situation dependent, depending on the property, depending on the price, like there's a whole wide variety of things to consider, but most of the time, if we're working with a client that needs a quick cash close and they want to sell the property as is, that's exactly what they're getting. There's no inspections, there's no fees. We're buying the property with no contingencies, which means as is. An agent, even if you say as is, cannot promise you that because they have absolutely no control over that. Again, it's the lender that makes the decision on whether or not they want to lend on that property for the buyer. Some of the cons, and really the cons pertain to working with home buyers that are not as credible, right? When we're talking about the pros of working with a home buyer, we're assuming that these home buyers are credible. They're validated, they've done a lot of business, they have a good reputation. A lot of the cons for working with a home buyer actually, unfortunately, come from home buying companies or individuals that present themselves as home buying companies that don't handle the business ethically. One of those big cons is lowball offers. When you're working with somebody that is either a mom and pop shop that doesn't really have much backing and they don't have cash, they're gonna give you exceptionally low offers because they just wanna sell that property off to somebody else that can actually bring the money. Essentially, you're working with an agent type figure, but in a very discounted sense, if that makes sense. You have limited ability to negotiate with home buyers that are not credible. A lot of the times they'll actually give you a price that really they can't pay and that is too high. And then they will come back and try to get a price reduction because, hey, they told you that you were going to close in 2 weeks. They get to day 13, they don't have a buyer. they're going to come back to you and get some sort of price reduction to try to make this deal work. Another big thing is in the markets that we operate in, there are very few local home buyers. A lot of the competition and a lot of the home buyers that exist in those marketplaces are big national hedge fund type buyers. What I've seen with those type of buyers is they don't understand what's truly going on neighborhood to neighborhood, in those markets. So what does that mean? It means that they either offer too high and they have to come back for reductions, or they offer too low and you end up selling your house lower than you would to the local guy. So those are the pros and cons of the 3 primary ways that you can sell your property. If you're looking to sell your property to a certified, validated home buyer, reach out to us, go to ibuystl.com, go to our website, fill out a web form, and we'd be happy to help you out.